Welcome back. Please go wash your hands. The way they taught you in primary. Or the way I taught you in cooking class. Press pause. And then come back. And settle in. Okay. I did just want to remind you that if as I'm reading, you hear a word that you don't know or something just doesn't make sense to you, I have read this book about 1,000,000 times. So I can help you with that. And you are welcome to send me an email. And my email address is lindsay.mistretta@postoakschool.org. And my first name is spelled Lindsay. Mistretta. So yeah, I'm here for you because some of this, especially if you're a little bit younger, you might not understand, or maybe there's just a word that you've never heard before. Happens to me all the time. Okay, so let's get back to it. The tents had gone. Except for a few pieces of broken chalk, apple cores, some stamped down grass, and alas, a few chicken feathers, there was nothing at all to show that the teachers had ever been there. A small voice said, "Psst." She looked down. A toad crept out from under a dock leaf. "Miss Tick said you'd be back," it said. "I expect there's some things you need to know." "Everything," said Tiffany. "We're swamped with tiny men. I can't understand half of what they say. They keep calling me a hag." "Ah, yes," said the toad. "You've got Knack-Mack-Feagles." "It snowed, and then it hadn't. I was chased by a horseman with no head, and one of the—" "What did you say they were?" "Knack-Mack-Feagles," said the toad, "also known as Pixies. They call themselves the Wee Free Men." "Well, one of them head-butted the horse. It fell over. It was a huge horse." "Ah, that sounds like a feagle," said the toad. "I gave them some milk and they tipped it over." "You gave the Knack-Mack-Feagle milk?" "Well, you said they were pixies." "Not pixies, Pixies. They certainly don't drink milk." "Are they from the same place as Jenny?" Tiffany demanded. "No, they're rebels," said the toad. "Rebels? Against who?" "Everyone. Anything," said the toad. "Now pick me up." "Why?" "Because there's a woman at the well over there giving you a funny look. Put me in your apron pocket for goodness sake." Tiffany snatched up the toad and smiled at the woman. "I'm making a collection of pressed toads," she said. "That's nice, dear," said the woman, and hurried away. "That wasn't very funny," said the toad from her apron. "People don't listen anyway." She sat down under a tree and took the toad out of her pocket. "The Feagles tried to steal some of our eggs and one of our sheep," she said, "but I got them back." "You got something back from the Knack-Mack-Feagles?" said the toad. "Were they ill?" "No, they were a bit, sweet, actually. They even did chores for me." "The Feagle did chores?" said the toad. "They never do chores. They're not helpful at all." "And then there was the headless horseman," said Tiffany. "He had no head." "Well, that is a major job qualification," said the toad. "What's going on, Toad?" said Tiffany. "Is it the Feagles who are invading?" The toad looked a bit shifty. "Miss Tick doesn't really want you to handle this," it said. "She'll be back soon with help." "Is she going to be in time?" Tiffany demanded. "I don't know. Probably. But you shouldn't—" "I want to know what is happening." "She's gone to get other witches," said the toad. She doesn't think you should—" "You'd better tell me what you know, Toad," said Tiffany. "Miss Tick isn't here. I am." "Another world is colliding with this one," said the toad. "There, happy now? That's what Miss Tick thinks. But it's happening faster than she expected. All the monsters are coming back." "Why?" "There's no one to stop them." There was silence for a moment. "There's me," said Tiffany. Chapter 4. The Wee Free Men. Nothing happened on the way back to the farm. The sky stayed blue, none of the sheep in the home paddocks appeared to be traveling backward very fast, and an air of hot emptiness lay over everything. Ratbag was on the path leading up to the back door, and he had something trapped in his paws. As soon as he saw Tiffany, he picked it up and exited around the corner of the house urgently, legs spinning in the high-speed slink of a guilty cat. Tiffany was too good a shot with a clod of earth. But at least there wasn't something red and blue in his mouth. "Look at him," she said. "Great cowardly blob. I really wish I could stop him catching baby birds. It's so sad." "You haven't got a hat you can wear, do you?" said the toad from her apron pocket. "I hate not being able to see." They went into the dairy, which Tiffany normally had to herself for most of the day. In the bushes by the door there was muffled conversation. It went like this. "What did the wee hag say?" "She said she wants yon cat to stop scraffing the wee weird birdies." "Is that a... Crivens! No problem." Tiffany put down the toad on the table as carefully as possible. "What do you eat?" she said. It was polite to offer guests food, she knew. "I've got used to slugs and worms and stuff," said the toad. "It wasn't easy. Don't worry if you don't have any. Don't worry if you don't have any. I expect you weren't expecting a toad to drop in." "How about some milk?" "You're very kind." Tiffany fetched some water and put it into a saucer. She washed while the toad crawled in. "Were you a handsome prince?" she asked. "Yeah, right, maybe," said the toad, dribbling milk. "So why did Miss Tick put a spell on you?" "Her? Huh, she couldn't do that," said the toad. "It's serious magic, turning someone into a toad, but leaving them thinking they're human. No, it was a fairy godmother. Never cross a woman with a star on a stick, young lady. They've got a mean streak." "Why did she do it?" The toad looked embarrassed. "I don't know," it said. "It's all a bit foggy. I just know I've been a person. At least I think I know. It gives me the willies. Sometimes I wake up in the night and I think, was I ever really human? Or was I just a toad that got on her nerves and she made me think I was human once? That'd be real torture, right? Supposing there's nothing for me to turn back into." The toad turned worried yellow eyes on her. "After all, it can't be very hard to mess with a toad's head, yeah? It must be much simpler than turning, a 160-pound human into 8 ounces of toad, yes? After all, where's the rest of the mass going to go, I asked myself. Is it just sort of, left over? Very worrying, I mean. I've got 1 or 2 memories of being human, of course, but what's a memory? Just a thought in your brain. How can you be sure it's real? Honestly, on nights when I've eaten a bad slug, I wake up screaming, except all that comes out is a croak. Thank you for the milk. It was very nice." Tiffany stared into the cup. "You know," she said, "magic is a lot more complicated than I thought." "Flappity, flappity, flap! Cheep, cheep, oh, poor me! Cheepity, cheepity, cheep!" Tiffany ran over to the window. There was a feagle on the path. It had made some crude wings out of a piece of a rag and a kind of beaky cap out of straw, and was wobbling around in a circle like a wounded bird. "Ah, cheepity, cheep, fluttery, flutter! I certainly hope there's no pussycat around. Oh, dearie me!" it yelled. And down the path, Ratbag, arch enemy of all baby birds, slunk closer, drooling. As Tiffany opened her mouth to yell, he leaped and landed with all 4 feet on the little man, or at least where the little man had been, because he had somersaulted in midair and was now right in front of Ratbag's face and had grabbed a cat ear with each hand. "Ah, see you, pussycat, scunner that yard," he yelled. "Here's a gifty from the twee birdies, ya schemy." He headbutted the cat hard on the nose. Ratbag spun in the air and landed on his back with his eyes crossed. He squinted in cold terror as the little man leaned down at him and shouted, "Cheep!" Then he levitated, in that way cats do, and became a ginger streak, rocketing down the path through the open door and shooting past Tiffany to hide under the sink. The feagle looked up, grinning, and saw Tiffany. "Please don't go," she began quickly, but he went in a blur. Tiffany's mother was hurrying down the path. Tiffany picked up the toad and put it back in her apron pocket just in time. The door was flung open. "Where's Wentworth? Is he here?" her mother asked urgently. "Did he come back? Answer me!" Didn't he go up to the shearing with you, Mom? Said Tiffany, suddenly nervous. She could feel the panic pouring off her mother like steam. We can't find him. There's a wild look in her mother's eyes. I turned my back for only 1 minute. Are you sure you haven't seen him? But he couldn't have come all the way back down here. Go and look in the house. Go on. Mrs. Aching hurried away. Hastily, Tiffany put the toad on the floor and urged him under the sink. She heard him croak, and Ratbag, mad with fear and bewilderment, came out from under the sink in a whirl of legs and rocketed out the door. She stood up. Her first shameful thought was, he wanted to go up to the shearing. How could he get lost? He went with Mom and Hannah and Fastidia. And how closely would Fastidia and Hannah watch him with all those young men up there? She tried to pretend she hadn't thought that, but she was treacherously good at spotting when she was lying. That's the trouble with a brain. It thinks more than you sometimes want it to. But he's never interested in moving far away from people. It's 1/2 mile up to the shearing pens, and he doesn't move that fast. After a few feet, he flops down and demands sweets. But it would be a bit more peaceful around here if he did get lost. There it went again, a nasty, shameful thought, which she tried to drown out by getting busy. But first she took some candy out of the jar as bait and rustled the bag as she ran from room to room. She heard boots in the yard as some of the men came down from the shearing sheds. But she got on with looking under beds and in cupboards, even ones so high that a toddler couldn't possibly reach them, then looked again under beds that she had already looked under, because it was that kind of search. It was the kind of search where you go and look in the attic even though the door is always locked. After a few minutes there were 2 or 3 voices outside calling for Wentworth, and she heard her father say, "Try down by the river." And that meant he was frantic too, because Wentworth would never walk that far without a bribe. He was not a child who was happy away from people with sweets. It's all your fault. The thought felt like a piece of ice in her mind. It's your fault because you didn't love him very much. He turned up and you weren't the youngest anymore, and you had to have him trailing around after you, and you kept wishing, didn't you, that he'd go away. That's not true, Tiffany whispered to herself. I quite liked him. Not very much, admittedly, not all the time. He didn't know how to play properly, and he never did what he was told. You thought it would be better if he did get lost. Anyway, she added in her head, you can't love people all the time when they have a permanent runny nose. And anyway, I wish I could find my brother, she said aloud. This seemed to have no effect, but the house was full of people opening and shutting doors and calling out and getting in one another's way, and the Feagles were shy, despite many of them having faces like a hatful of knuckles. Don't wish, Miss Tick had said. Do things. She went downstairs. Even some of the women who had been packing fleeces up at the shearing had come down. They were clustered around her mother, who was sitting at the table crying. No one noticed Tiffany. That often happened. She slipped into the dairy, closed the door carefully behind her, and leaned down to peer under the sink. The door burst open again, and her father ran in. He stopped. Tiffany looked up guiltily. He can't be under there, girl, her father said. Well, said Tiffany. Did you look upstairs? Even the attic, Dad. Well, her father looked panicky and impatient at the same time. Go and do something. Yes, Dad. When the door had shut, Tiffany peered under the sink again. Are you there, Toad? Very poor pickings under here, the toad answered, crawling out. You keep it very clean, not even a spider. This is urgent, snapped Tiffany. My little brother has gone missing in broad daylight up on the downs where you can see for miles. Oh, crope, said the toad. Pardon? That was a swearing in toad, said the toad. Sorry, but has what's going on got something to do with magic, said Tiffany. It has, hasn't it? I hope it hasn't, said the toad, but I think it has. Have those little men stolen Wentworth? Who, the Feagles? They don't steal children. There was something in the way the toad said it. They don't steal children. Do you know who has taken my brother then? Tiffany demanded. No, but they might, said the toad. Look, Miss Tick told me that you were not to. My brother has been stolen, said Tiffany sharply. Are you going to tell me not to do anything about it? No, but... Good! Where are the Fiegels now? Lying low, I expect. The place is full of people searching, after all. How can I bring them back? I need them. Miss Tick said, how can I bring them back? You want to bring them back, then? Said the toad, looking mournful. Yes! It's just that's something not many people have ever wanted to do, said the toad. They're not like brownies. If you get Knack-Mack Feagles in the house, it's usually best to move away, he sighed. Tell me, is your father a drinking man? He has a beer sometimes, said Tiffany. What's that got to do with it? Only beer? Well, I'm not supposed to know about what my father calls the special sheep liniment, said Tiffany. Granny Aching used to make it in the cowshed. Strong stuff, is it? It dissolves spoons, said Tiffany. It's for special occasions. Father says it's not for women because it puts hairs on your chest. Then, if you want to be sure of finding the Knack-Mack Feagle, go and fetch some, said the toad. It will work, believe me. 5 minutes later, Tiffany was ready. Few things are hidden from a quiet child with good eyesight. She knew where the bottles were stored, and she had one now. The cork was hammered in over a piece of rag, but it was old, and she was able to lever it out with the tip of a knife. The fumes made her eyes water. She went to pour some of the golden brown liquid into a saucer. No, we'll be trampled to death if you do that, said the toad. Just leave the cork off. Fumes rose up from the top of the bottle, wavering like the air over rocks on a hot day. She felt it, a sensation, in the dim, cool room of riveted attention. She sat down on a milking stool and said, All right, you can come out now. There were hundreds. They rose up from behind buckets. They lowered themselves on strings from ceiling beams. They sidled sheepishly from behind the cheese racks. They crept out from under the sink. They came out of places where you'd think a man with hair dyke and orange gone nova couldn't possibly hide. They were all about 6 inches tall and mostly colored blue, although it was hard to know if that was their actual color, if that was the actual color of their skin or just the dye from their tattoos, which covered every inch that wasn't covered with red hair. They wore short kilts. Some of them wore other bits of clothing too, like skinny vests. A few of them wore rabbit or rat skulls on their heads as a sort of helmet. And every single one of them carried, slung across his back, a sword nearly as big as he was. However, what Tiffany noticed more than anything else was that they were scared of her. Mostly they were looking at their own feet, which was no errand for the faint-hearted because their feet were large, dirty, and half tied up with animal skins to make very bad shoes. None of them wanted to look her in the eye. You were the people who filled the water buckets, she said. There was a lot of foot shuffling and coughing and a chorus of eyes. And the wood box? There were more eyes. Tiffany glared at them. And what about the sheep? This time they all looked down. Why did you steal the sheep? There was a lot of muttering and nudging, and then one of the tiny men removed his rabbit skull helmet and twiddled it nervously in his hands. We was hungry, miss, he muttered. But when we kenned it was thine, we did put the beastie back in the fold. They looked so crestfallen that Tiffany took pity on them. I expect you wouldn't have stolen it if you weren't so hungry, then, she said. There were several hundred astonished looks. Oh, we would, mistress, said the helmet twiddler. You would? Tiffany sounded so surprised that the twiddler looked around at his colleagues for support, and they all nodded. Well, yes, mistress, we have to. We're famously stealing folk, aren't we, lads? What's it we're famous for? Stealing, said the blue men. And what else, lads? Fighting. And what else? Drinking. And what else? There was a certain amount of thought about this, but they all reached the same conclusion. Drinking and fighting. And there was some else, muttered the twiddler. Ah, yes. Tell the hag, lads. Stealing and fighting and drinking, shouted the blue men cheerfully. Tell the wee hag who we are, lads, said the helmet twiddler. There was the scrape of many small swords being drawn and thrust into the air. Knack-Mack Feagle, the wee free men, nay king, nay queen, nay lord, nay master, we will not be fooled again. Tiffany stared at them. They were all watching her to see what she was going to do next. and the longer she said nothing, the more worried they became. They lowered their swords, looking embarrassed. "But we wouldn't dare deny a powerful hag, except maybe for a strong drink," said the Twiddler, his helmet spinning desperately in his hands and his eyes on the bottle of special sheep lemon. "Will you no help us?" "Help you," said Tiffany. "I want you to help me. Someone has taken my brother in broad daylight." "Oh, whaley, whaley, whaley," said the helmet Twiddler. "She's come then. She's come a-fetchin'. We're too late. It's the Queen." "What? There were 4 of them?" "They mean the Queen," said the Toad. "The Queen of the—" "Hush your gob!" shouted the helmet Twiddler, but his voice was lost in wails and groans of the Mac-McFeegle. They were pulling at their hair and stamping on the ground and shouting, "Alack-a-day!" and "Whaley, whaley, whaley!" And the Toad was arguing with the helmet Twiddler, and everyone was getting louder to make themselves heard. Tiffany stood up. "Everybody shut up right now," she said. Silence fell, except for a few sniffs and faint wailies from the back. "We was only drearing our weird, mistress," said the helmet Twiddler, almost crouching in fear. "But not in here," snapped Tiffany, shaking with anger. "This is a dairy. I have to keep it clean." Dreeing your weir means facing your fate," said the Toad. "Because if the Queen is here, then it means our Kelda is weakening fast," said the helmet Twiddler. "And we'll have no one to look after us." No one to look after us, thought Tiffany. Hundreds of tough little men who could each win the worst broken nose contest needed someone to look after them. And there I shall stop. And I will see you next time. Bye.